It is authenticity that gives us the connection that we need with people, but the process of becoming authentic is, in fact, rooted in the process of allowing oneself to become very vulnerable, and which seems to be almost the exact opposite of what one would expect to be a key beginning of leadership. But this notion that you have to let people know that you don't know sometimes, often, is part of that. And also to allow people to get to know who you are. And in the letting it be known who you are, people then feel comfortable to tell you who they are. And then a new dialogue begins.
Somebody once said the definition of vulnerability is the willingness to be hurt by life, to be open to the feeling of life in a way you can be hurt by life. That's the vulnerable moment, is the openness to that. There's just, there is in the artistic creative process, I think, as much joy as there is disappointment and frustration, because you only kind of touch the cloth occasionally in terms of fulfilling the vision you have for something you're wanting to create, and being willing to accept what you're given. I used to love William Stafford's work, and I think what I really was drawn to in his work as a poet, a much-loved American poet, is that he nurtured his relationship with his muse throughout his life, right up until the day before he passed away. He wrote a poem every day of his life. And in order to do that, somebody said, what happens if you write a bad poem, William? And he said, well, I just lower my standards, he said. Which I think is his way. He said, because I'm always given something. And my willingness to be in relationship to my muse is to accept what I'm given. Maybe I'll get something more the next day. But sometimes we set our standards so high we turn away so much of what we're offered because somehow it doesn't measure up to what we hoped it might be.
The work of business is sooner or later someone has to make a decision. And I think herein lies perhaps the tension of what we're talking about, because we have to find a way to have that conversation, but we also have to know when it's time to put a stake in the ground, to make a decision. And for me, I think what seems to have been quite useful is the notion of creating scenarios and asking people to in fact not picture one potential outcome, but several potential outcomes, and project themselves into that outcome, and almost get them to describe what they're feeling in that scenario and how they feel about the way their profession is unfolding or the way the business is unfolding. And then to sort of draw a string back to where we are right now and think about whether we can move down that path and what we need to do to move down that path. So I think this process of allowing time for dialogue, but then recognizing that eventually a decision has to come out of it, is what we have to struggle with. I remember, I think it was probably the first time that Deborah and I met, I had been recounting my first real experience as an entrepreneur. Usually I was the first person there in the morning that opened the door, and generally speaking I was the last person out and I locked the door. And so many nights as I was leaving, I would close the door and turn the key. It would almost be an overwhelming thought, almost became a physical thought, that there was something going on the other side of that door that didn't used to exist there. And it exists there now because of what we're doing. And I think we must find places in our life where we can have that feeling about something that we're engaged with, because it is so powerful. And what I find is that it begins to affect everybody around us when it starts, because it is bigger than us. It's way beyond us, because immediately we realize we need more than us to do it. And the others that come, in fact, have their own sense of ownership. In fact, in many ways, even greater ownership than we might have when we first got started. And, every person that leaves the concert hall takes that music with them in the way that they heard it. And it's the same business.